Welcome to the Streets and People podcast, where we explore having more transport options that are less hassle to use. Hosted by Get Around Caboolture, we bring you 3 types of episodes. People and Projects share stories of change. Not Everyone Drives gives voice to non-drivers. Road Rules 360 unpacks road rules for people outside a car. Music by Grand Project, and let's make our Grand Project reimagining streets made for people. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes. I'm in the studio with Peter Bourke, who I met at the Asia Pacific Bike Riding Conference. He gave a presentation on e-bike batteries and helmet legislation, and I thought this would be a really great topic for the community to know about what is the legislation on all this, because there's been quite a lot of changes, and you seem to be right in the middle of all that. I'm here on Gubbi Gubbi country in Queensland, in Caboolture. And Peter, whereabouts are you?
Thank you for the intro and thank you for inviting me. I'm based in Bendigo in country Victoria. I'm lucky enough that I get to combine a lifestyle and a job that I actually enjoy, because I get to talk about bikes and scooters.
We all come from somewhere. We all come with something. We don't arrive magically in front of the microphone with a subject of interest without having a driver for that, particularly in active transport, because you have to be so passionate about it in order to be able to really go with the energy, because it's not necessarily always the most popular of topics. So what made you interested in batteries, battery fires, the legislation around that?
The position I'm in right now has been a journey over time. My background is actually sports science. I managed a lot of YMCAs and community programs through that. I then evolved into Indigenous programs. I've done volunteer work around the world, and I actually came into this role promoting bike riding, and then it evolved into the technical side of things. Over time, my knowledge grew and my focus on this area grew, and through this role, I was moved on to Standards Australia committees to do with all bike products, and we're literally releasing last month a new standard for bike lights. I was also lucky enough to be in Portugal last month at the International Standards Committees as we try and harmonise e-bike legislation around the world.
We've had Stephen Hodge from We Ride, and you are a colleague of Stephen's, is that right?
I do work with Stephen. I work across We Ride. I also have the role of General Manager of Bicycle Industries Australia. So We Ride is a position that gets more people riding bikes. BIA is really about supporting the industry to sell bikes. BIA sell bikes, We Ride Australia, more bums on bikes. They're very closely aligned, but they do have very distinct roles that they play in the conversation.
So that's very interesting about the standards.
The International Standards Committee, it looks at, again, similar to the Australian Standards Committee, it looks at all components of a bike and the standards relating to that. So we're very much talking about the bike itself and the standard associated with it to make sure it's the best quality, the safest, the best outcome, the highest standard we can make. Now, I say with a bit of tongue-in-cheek to harmonise the legislation around the standards around the world. We can't even harmonise Australia, made up of 8 states and territories and 1 federal government. So there is an even greater challenge to look at the international side of things. But we do live in an international world in terms of our market supply. We don't make products in Australia when it comes to the bicycle industry. So we are certainly beholden in Australia to what happens in the rest of the world. So where we can influence or make sure we're part of conversation at an international level, that helps us to get the best quality products we can in Australia.
You're looking at the legislation for bikes, and do you do scooters as well?
No, we don't. I don't do scooters officially, but of course, with my role as the chair of the Standards Committee relating to bike products, I'm also one of the representatives on the committee that's developing training packages for bicycle mechanics. And of course, a lot of the products and a lot of the businesses that sell e-bikes also sell e-scooters. We fall into that role of having a position on the e-scooter Standards Committee, having a role in the e-scooter training packages, but officially I don't have that role. It sits under my umbrella, I guess.
Now, you said that components weren't harmonised. I always thought a bike is a bike is a bike. What is it that differs in terms of the legislation for each state? And we're in Queensland. It's good to talk about that, but we have listeners actually across the country.
Prior to 2012, the legislation in Australia for e-bikes was maximum power of 200 watts, and that was the only guiding principles. And we all remember what used to be the whippersnipper attached to the bike, and you could hear the bike coming from a mile away or 10 miles away. Now, in 2012, the then Parliamentary Secretary for Transport, Catherine King, introduced what was called EN 15194, which is the European definition of an e-bike. That's what we know today as a maximum 200 250 watt continuous rated power and the maximum 25 km an hour assisted speed. So that became the norm for the importation and the sale of e-bikes. But that, of course, doesn't control the road laws. We worked with every state and territory, and it took until May 2017, so 5 years, for New South Wales Parks and Recreation to become the last jurisdiction to align with the federal definition. So we had consistent laws for import, for consistent laws for sale, and consistent laws for use. We also, during that period in 2016, introduced the Australian standard for e-bikes, which is called AS 15194, which is equivalent to the European standard. So that was great. We had harmonisation. And then from that moment on, jurisdictions looked to tweak to improve what they thought was improving the definition. There was two definitions. We had the 250 watts and we still had the 200 watts, which allowed throttles above 6 k's an hour. Queensland became the first state to ban that. They, along with New South Wales and South Australia, you're not allowed to throttle over 6 k's an hour, but in other states you are. And then from that moment on, in 2021, the federal government changed the definition of an e-bike, just tweaked the definition. Queensland actually adopted that definition about 3 months ago, so it took 3 years. South Australia are the only two states that fully adopted that. New South Wales introduced the 500 watt category last year, so the power limit can be 500 watts. But because Australia is such a small market in world terms in terms of e-bikes, and New South Wales is a much smaller market than that, of course, the major brands don't supply a 500 watt e-bike into New South Wales. They supply a 250 watt e-bike to Australia. So we've got variations across the country. And then you've got age limits, like in WA, you've got to be 16 to ride an e-bike. And then how we term them. There's pedelecs, there's e-packs, there's power-assisted bicycles, there's power-assisted cycles. There's 7 different definitions of what an e-bike is across the country. And in one state, you're still allowed petrol-powered assisted motors on bikes. It is very much variations across the country from what was once harmonised. And then if we look at scooters, there are no 2 states and territories in the country that have the same definition and use laws or road laws when it comes to scooters. As an example, in Queensland, the maximum weight of a scooter is allowed to be 60 kilos. In Western Australia, the maximum weight is 25 kilos. In Tassie, it's 45 kilos. Everyone else is somewhere in between. Then, of course, we've got speed limits. In Victoria, it can be on a 60 km an hour road, but in Queensland, it can only be a 50 km an hour road. In Victoria, you're not allowed to ride it on the footpath. In Queensland, obviously, they promote riding on the footpath. Again, there's variations across the various states. As you cross borders, you have to be very conscious of your product, whether it's an e-bike, an e-scooter, the way it's used and how it's used does vary state to state. People have to be very aware what they're doing and where they're doing and what was legal in one state. In Queensland, the Coolangatta, Tweed Heads, Kingscliff area, if you cross the border there, which can be a 5-minute bike ride, you could be breaking the law without knowing it.
That's really good because we do a series of episodes about Queensland road rules for non-car users. The PMD, Personal Mobility Device legislation, John and I put in a request to the Transport and Main Roads to see if we could assist with the harmonisation of active transport road users, because the road rules for active transport users, it's so diverse, because if you're on a scooter, it's this, if it's a bike, that. The TMR then wrote back and said this goes up to the Australian model road rules and then it comes down. But you're saying actually that's not at all how it works. Everybody's doing their own thing. But it did make me wonder how you could harmonise the active transport road rules given the variety in the legislation. It makes sense to do that. You have that for cars, so of course you would presumably at some stage do the same for active transport. Is it that there isn't very good infrastructure in Queensland but there is in Melbourne or other cities?
You've made a very good comment about the national model rules. Generally that happens, but even the model rules for car users aren't 100% endorsed across every state and territory. I'm based in Victoria. A prime example for us is hook turns. Hook turns are not something that's universally accepted across the country, but if you come to Melbourne because of trams, hook turns are quite common where there's tram tracks. And that is something that is not taken from the model rules, but is taken from a state-based rule. Just to filter that down further, in Victoria, all bikes, whether it's e-bike, analogue, or however you want to phrase it, you can ride on a footpath up to the age of 12. Once you're over 12, you're not allowed to ride a bicycle on a footpath. That is a rule that is with active transport. Forget the personal mobility devices or the electronic e-mobility. That is just a general rule. And that, of course, has flowed on to the use of scooters, the use of e-bikes. That has actually remained consistent in Victoria. To review all active transport laws across the country would be beneficial. There's no doubt about that. And I guess that the personal mobility devices has actually just exacerbated it, because what we've also done, e-bikes, e-scooters, they've introduced a whole new population to mobility outside the motor vehicle, and whether that's scooters or bikes. And so it has really actually highlighted some of these idiosyncrasies as you move from state to state.
In terms of the battery size and the battery capacities, is that legislation different?
The size and the quality of the battery is actually something that is quite problematic. There's standards around the quality of the battery, but it is a very old standard. In Australia, we're based on a 2009 European standard. The next meeting on updating that standard is actually on the 4th of December, so hopefully we're not far away from getting better standards for batteries. But that doesn't dictate the size of the battery. That doesn't dictate the chemistry of the battery. That doesn't dictate the origin or where it's made, how it's made. In the future, there'll be some better testing on the quality, but right now we don't have that. In terms of the size of the battery, that really comes down to the manufacturer or the consumer. The bigger the battery, the more energy. The bigger the energy, the further you can go. Great. But the bigger the battery, the more expensive it is. The bigger the battery, the heavier it is. Like everything, there's a trade-off. And also, the better the quality of the battery, the more expensive it is. Like everything, you get what you pay for, but there is a trade-off on how we develop the batteries. And also, the product you're pushing, you have a different type of battery in a mountain bike to a general commuter bike or a cargo bike. You can have different sizes, because if I'm pushing a heavy cargo bike and I'm expecting to carry a load, I'm probably going to have bigger batteries because I know I'm going to need more energy. Then if I'm riding a lightweight commuter bike that is just me, I probably don't need the same size battery.
And so when it comes to battery fires, what is the legislation happening around that? Is Queensland out of step with other states? Is it the same? What's the deal there?
That's a whole other challenge. The leading state in this regard is New South Wales, without a doubt. We talked about harmonisation across the world, then harmonisation across the country, then harmonisation within the state. New South Wales has actually got a 14-department working group trying to identify how they manage e-bikes. That's how many departments are affected by e-bikes, whether that's parks and recreation, whether that's environment, whether that's the police, whether that's transport. You get the idea. There's lots of different departments that it touches on. They are working strongly to actually deliver that. In fact, I'm meeting with TAFE New South Wales next week to develop training packages for e-scooter mechanics in New South Wales, because that's another part of the puzzle. But the Office of Fair Trading in New South Wales has introduced new legislation that came in on the 2nd of August, and the first stage will come in on the 2nd of February next year, and it will introduce stricter requirements on actually mandating that all products coming into Australia must meet a recognised standard, whether that's the European or the American. Then there'll be stricter standards on the 2nd of August next year, and then there'll be stricter again on the 2nd of February 2025. One of the key elements of that will be the requirement to have batteries tested, certified and audited and prove that they meet the quality standard. They'll have to have paperwork, and they'll also have to be marked with what is called an RCM, a regulatory compliance mark. That is not required in any other state. So we have standards for e-bikes, but we literally don't have a mandate to actually meet that. Just to touch on that quickly, prior to 2021, e-bikes were under what's now called the Road Vehicle Standards Act. The federal government, in their wisdom, in January 2021, removed what was called AB category vehicles from the Road Vehicle Standards Act, because prior to that, every importer had to prove that their bikes met the standard to bring them into the country. Once they removed it from the Act, there is literally no requirement to prove that your bike meets any standard to bring it into the country. So that opened up the market to any quality of product, and obviously we've seen what's happened with the change in the quality of product. New South Wales is now going on a state level, mandating it to sell the product, you must meet these standards. If you look at Fire Authority out of New South Wales, they've released a report last year on the brands that have actually caught fire or caused fires, and none of them are what you'd consider to be the high quality products. That is one of the things we're working on. How do we make sure that we've got quality products, and the mandating of these standards, the requirement to meet them, the requirement to certify the batteries is part of that process. The second part of that is any battery coming to the Australian market. Right now, there is no requirement to test it at all. So if you bring in a second battery, a replacement battery, or you do a conversion kit, there's literally no requirement to have that meet any standard whatsoever. So I can just click on Temu, Alibaba, eBay, and I can get any battery from anywhere and put it on my bike. And that is one of the things we're finding is the most problematic with e-bikes, e-scooters, e-mobility. We just don't know the quality of the product that is going onto these bikes or these e-mobility devices.
So you've talked about batteries. You go on to whichever website site and you just click away and it arrives. How will you be able to not have those batteries coming in, even though obviously it's not legal, but people are always sidestepping the law by what's being put in the post? How will you be able to manage that?
You're correct. That is a challenge. Will the government, because as the industry body, I really have no control over that conversation, will they be able to manage getting rid of all of the poorer quality products that don't meet the standard? The answer is no. Will they be able to significantly reduce the poor quality products coming in? That would be our starting point. We know the origins of a lot of these products. We have worked with the government to identify some of those locations. One of the biggest challenges is this is a state-based approach. We really need a federal approach because federal government controls customs, controls import, and that's where we really need to have those controls. But what it will do, it will make it illegal to import these products and sell them. As an individual, I might go and get a poor quality battery. That's on me. As a business of whatever type, I will now be forced to actually make sure the product that I'm importing and selling has been tested and does meet the standards. Generally, a large number of the products are coming through businesses. Yes, individuals can still do what they want to do, but between the barriers to entry and also what is a public communication campaign or education campaign, hopefully that will reduce the individuals that are choosing to do that.
Great, because for instance in the UK where they've been having a lot of battery fires, it causes all these problems with the insurance for buildings. So apartment buildings, they ban them when they're so useful. If it's a good quality one, it seems crazy. It's like saying, well, you have a battery fire in a car, you have to stop all cars being used, and battery fires do happen in cars. We just don't hear about them to the same extent. Perhaps you could speak to that.
You mentioned car fires. Depending on what numbers you look at, you could certainly say there's far more internal combustion or petrol engine fires than there are battery fires. But of course, we actually accept them and we don't even notice them. In fact, I drove past one the other day and you went, oh, that's interesting. That's pretty cool. And you keep driving. It doesn't impact on your psyche at all because car crashes are an accepted part of travel. Car fires are interesting. There's a lot of things that we've already accepted as just a normal, course of doing business. We don't want to do that with e-bikes and e-scooters, but they're still new to the market, so they are certainly making an impact on the way we think. In WA, we've certainly worked with the government on developing government building parking guidelines to ensure that e-mobility devices are still allowed in those. We've certainly worked with strata title associations to ensure that they continue to be allowed. Universities are really one of our next challenges because they are a huge destination, or they benefit greatly from more people riding and scooting, and we have certainly some universities that have banned them. We're trying to work on ways to ensure that they continue to allow them. You're right, we should be promoting them. They are fantastic, and the number of fires is so minimal compared to the number. And the other thing is they are lithium-ion batteries. The average house, I read the other day from, I think it was ABS, says that the average house has between 22 and 25 lithium-ion battery devices within their house. And the irony of this conversation is I was in the hardware shop buying a new smoke detector on the weekend, and it was a lithium-ion battery-powered smoke detector. Our fire prevention device is now controlled by a lithium-ion battery, which is what we're calling the problem. So the reality for us is we have standards. We need to get them in place, we need to enforce them, and we need to police them, I guess is the thing. It's ironic that we're calling for more enforcement of legislation or stricter legislation. The change of the federal government legislation in 2021 has certainly had a negative impact on e-mobility device product quality. To stop them at the border is certainly what the industry would love to see an improved process on.
It's really nice to have a good solid overview of the legislation and just the challenges. Helmets. Now, there's been some changes in helmet legislation.
The ACCC commenced a 12-month review of helmet legislation in 2016. They concluded that 12-month review, and I do emphasise the word 12-month, in March 2024. So it did take a little bit longer than they had expected. And what they were reviewing is, should we continue to just allow Australian helmet standards to be sold in Australia, or should we identify international markets that we believe are of quality standard and allow them to be sold in Australia as well? So what they did in releasing the report, they announced in March that helmets that meet European or 3 US standards, CSPC, SNEL and UL, they could be imported and sold into Australia. Now that's fine. We've now opened up the market so we can sell helmets that have met a European standard or the American standard. The problem with that is that the road law in each state and territory actually identifies that it must be an Australian standard helmet. So if you're wearing a European Australian standard helmet, under the eyes of the law, it's the equivalent of not wearing a helmet at all. So we now have a situation where it's legal to import and sell these standard helmets, but not legal to use. The New South Wales government, to try and get around what they saw coming, they introduced a star rating system. They do testing and they put a star rating. You could comment whether it's a good or a bad process, but that's not the point. But because of that, they fast-tracked the change to the road laws to allow European standards and American standard helmets to now be used on New South Wales roads. The problem with that is they're allowed on New South Wales roads, but they're not allowed on Queensland roads or Victorian roads or ACT roads. WA has also followed suit, so they're now allowed on New South Wales and WA laws. WA is obviously a little bit more insular. It can't accidentally cross the border from WA into another state. So we now have the situation where the major brands are not selling helmets to European or American standards because it's too hard to have different stock, making sure the right stock's going to different areas. So we now have a situation where we're still selling mainly Australian helmet standards, but in some states it's legal to have European, but not in others. A dog's breakfast is the terminology we tend to use a little bit, and so we're working on transitioning that process. They did this with motorcycle helmets, and I believe the end of the process took 3 to 5 years. As it was just March 2024 they introduced this. I believe we've got a while to go. I know in Queensland you've just had a state election, you've had a change of government. Updating the helmet legislation I wouldn't expect would be the highest priority. I expect that could take a little while before that gets on the radar of the new Transport Minister to sign that one off. When that happens, the next thing we've got is the ACCC at the same time commenced a 12-month review of bicycle standards. Is that going to be an 8, 9, 10, 12-year process? We're not really sure. We'll let everyone know when that concludes.
Wow. When you say dog's breakfast, I thought it was just the Queensland road rules for active transport users, but wow, it is just one dog's breakfast. And part of it, I guess, is because the more clearly you define something, the minute there's an aberration of any kind or a different circumstance, you have to create new legislation to allow for that. Then it happens here but not here, and it starts to get more and more quirky.
Absolutely. We think we're in a big world, but whether you're in Queensland and then you look into the national scene, and then of course you look into the international scene, there is so many variations. The people that make the changes do them because they think they're making things better. Unfortunately, the laws of unintended consequences quite often impact the next wave, the next wave, the next wave. You could go all the way back to the gauge of the trains. Everyone thought that they had the right gauge, so we've got broad gauge, standard gauge and everything else, and so we can't have trains running around Australia. History is littered with these changes, everyone thinking they're doing the right thing, and this is another example.
All right, well, we're heading up towards the end of time. Let's say our listener is in the community, doesn't have a lot of cash, can't afford a car, is looking on any of the online secondhand stores. I look at them and I go, gosh, they look like an awful lot of stolen devices. But assuming they're not stolen, you think, oh, well, I want something. So what do I do? Do I get one? Or do I go to a shop and I get finance? Help me here.
TMR did a fantastic thing and rolled out the $2 million e-bike purchase incentives. And what that showed was just how much people wanted these. They went in record time, which is a fantastic outcome because it got people into e-bikes. If you're looking at secondhand, the very, very, very first red flag is always if it does or doesn't come with a charger. If it doesn't come with a charger, that is the biggest red flag that it has been stolen. And the problem with that is the quality brands won't let you buy a new charger without proving the origin of the bike because they want to stop their stolen bikes. But one of the biggest problems with battery fires is battery chargers that don't talk to the battery. Because what happens is there's a battery management system between the charger and the battery. And if you've got the right chargers, they'll actually stop the amount of charge going into the battery. So for a safety reason, you can't just buy a bike and you can't just get a charger off eBay because you don't know if they're compatible, which is a higher risk. So that's my first red flag. A secondhand market is not a bad thing, but irrespective of whether you're buying it new or secondhand, go for the best possible brand or quality product you can. You can't tell whether the battery is a good battery. You can't tell the history of them because you can't open up a battery and have a look at it. Go for the best quality. Where possible, let's be honest, go to a quality shop. A retailer, online, there are some good ones, but as a whole, you're much, much safer to go to a shop because their reputation relies on you coming back. So they will look after you. They will service your bike. They will make sure it fits you. They'll make sure that it actually does what you want it to do. If you're just wanting to ride to work and you find a good, cheap mountain bike, they're for two different reasons. So a shop will make sure you get the right product for you. It'll also make sure it's safe. It'll also make sure it meets the standards. It'll also make sure the charger is compatible. A quality product from a quality shop. You mentioned that people can be short on money, but buy the best quality you can possibly afford for that safety reason. That's one of the key things we have. have. And not only that, it'll increase your level of fun, it'll increase the likelihood you use it, and it'll increase the benefits you actually get from it. So whatever the cost, it becomes an investment because you are now using it. You don't need the public transport as much, you don't have the car, you don't need taxi costs, you are actually using it, you're having fun, and you are cruising past everyone else that's stuck in a whatever vehicle they're in, and you're enjoying the ride home. And in Queensland, with 400 days of sunshine a year, it is a perfect place to do it.
Yeah, we've got lots of sunshine and definitely it's great. And some people go, oh, but it's raining, I couldn't do that. And the rain is nothing when you're on a bike. It's just fantastic. It cools you down. I actually quite like riding in the rain. It just is a nice feeling.
Absolutely. And along with good quality bikes, there's good quality rain gear. If you're riding home from work and you get wet, you go home and you get changed. Most times you're going somewhere where that is feasible. And we also know end of trip facilities are improving. There's some places that haven't quite caught up, but there's a huge number, whether it's universities, professional businesses, government buildings, whatever, there's a huge number that are realizing they need to do this for a number of reasons. But one of them is their staff are happier. They hang on to staff better. Staff retention is a big, big cost. So to actually invest in some end of trip facilities to keep staff, it's actually a good investment.
Moreton Bay Council is in the process of writing an active transport strategy. And one of the biggest feedback is we want bike racks because we want to be able to lock it up. I personally have insurance for my bike and I'm very grateful for that because my bike was stolen recently and it cost me $30 a month. I was really pleased. I got a new bike within 5 weeks or something. So I think that's also something that's valuable to do. But it's your bike, your money, your due diligence. You do what is right for you. That's my legal caveat.
And just to add really quickly to that insurance element, we know there's a big number of fat bikes or overpowered bikes that are on the market. One thing when it comes to insurance, we've seen a really big change in the insurers agents. They won't cover those types of bikes under household insurance because they're not confident they are road legal. They won't cover public liability. So if you're involved in an accident involving someone else, if you're on an overpowered or non-road legal e-bike, they won't cover insurance. Even though you might think you've got insurance, you'll be on the hook. When you talk about what sort of bike to buy, make sure it's road legal and make sure that it can't be modified or you don't modify it because A, your product insurance, so if it's stolen, it won't be replaced. But B, the worst case scenario is you could actually lose your house because you're riding an unroadworthy motorbike without a license and insurance will not touch you with a 10-foot barge pole and say, no, you're on your own there. You ask the question about what to buy, make sure it is road legal.
Is it not a motorbike and it's not an e-bike? It's this middle ground.
If it's not an e-bike, it moves into the next level, which is a moped or a motorbike, but it doesn't meet the Australian design rules. So therefore, it's an unroadworthy motorbike because it can't be an e-bike because it doesn't meet the laws. So therefore, you need a license. Therefore, you need a motorbike helmet. Therefore, you can't ride it on bike paths. Therefore, you can't carry a pillion passenger. Therefore, if you're underage or the pillion passenger can't be a child. So there's all these new laws that if you're riding a non-road legal, and the reality is you're probably not going to get in trouble by the police unless something goes wrong. And whether that's you accidentally hit someone, even if a car hits you and you're not at fault, you're now breaking the law though. So there's all these things to consider. There's very good quality bikes that are road legal. And I understand there's reasons why people do act in a certain way, but just be conscious if something goes wrong, unfortunately, you'll be left out on your own.
And it's nothing for, say, particularly on a scooter, a rock to go underneath the wheel, there's small wheels, that's you. And the same on an e-bike and you know, it's a wet day, steering, whatever on a bike. Okay. It's been such a great conversation. I've learned so much. I've really appreciated it. It's our second attempt at recording this episode, so I appreciate you coming back. Any final words, any closing remarks?
From our perspective, e-bikes, e-scooters, e-mobility, they are the future. From the industry, from WeRide, doesn't matter which angle you come from. And from a lot of governments, they also understand it's the future. Your listeners, I'm sure, don't need to be told how good they are, how fun they are, how they're actually inherently safe. They're great products. They have taken the world by storm. They are taking Australia by storm. 50% of bikes sold through bike shops are now e-bikes. The community wants them. They're delivering it. They're impacting so significantly on the transport task. So moving people, they are the future. They're fun. Get on them.
Absolutely. I can't agree with you more. That's why we have this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I just was really pleased to have you on because you spoke about all the small little minutiae of the legislation, which is so complex, and what a dog's breakfast it is. So great to know how bad it is. Thanks so much, Peter.
Pleasure, and thank you very much for having me.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Streets and People podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who'd find it helpful. Your small action could make a big difference. We're on all the usual podcasting platforms, so don't miss a single story. To find out what else we do, check out getaroundcaboolture.au. Until next time, remember, there's more than one way to get where you're going. Keep moving, keep listening, and keep imagining streets made for people.